Joining us now, John Mappin, live in the United Kingdom. He's the owner of Camelot Castle Hotel, and he's also a leading advocate of Brexit. Hey, John, great to have you with us.
Hello, how are you?
Never
Good
better,
morning.
John, never better. Thanks for being with us. Where are you in the United Kingdom?
Well,
Where
I'm
are you
calling
now?
you from Camelot Castle, which is sits at the birthplace of King Arthur, of all places, and that's in Cornwall, in the West Country of England. So it's right on the coast, looks out over the Atlantic. We can't quite see America from here, but we're looking in that direction today, and obviously very, very sad time with the shootings that have occurred. And obviously the whole of England, would like to convey our condolences to the families, and it's a ghastly situation. But the reason I'm calling is I've been doing a tremendous amount of research into this over the last really 25 years. And I think we can all agree that these shootings were not happening in the way that they were happening, let's say 40 years ago. You still had gun ownership. And there is something that has been overlooked. And what I'm calling for is a congressional inquiry into the relationship between the psychiatric drugs, the antidepressants, and the drugging of the U.S. population and these mass shootings. Because time and time again, we find that the common denominator with all these shooters is that they are either on serotonin reuptake inhibitors or some form of psychiatric drug. And of course, we haven't seen the medical records of these two latest shooters, but it is a 95% probability that they will have been on one of these drugs. And the horror that these drugs are actually causing now in American society really needs to be exposed. The problem is there's a lot of money involved, and I think there are more big pharma lobbyists in D.C. than there are congressmen. And so the truth of this gets constantly covered up, and what gets blamed is the guns and the gun owners. But in fact, a gun by itself, of course, can't pull its own trigger. It takes an insane person to pull the trigger on a gun. And the question is, what is creating the insanity? And the answer to that is these antipsychotic drugs. They actually create insane people who go out and do these things. They get triggered, and basically the drugs have done something very, very sinister to these people. So that's really why I wanted to call in today, was to really call for that congressional inquiry into that, because I think that's something that America has completely overlooked. And that's what I wanted to say.
John Mappin, does the UK have the same issue with doctors prescribing these various mood-altering drugs? I mean, it started in the
We
U.S.
do, but really not to the same degree. Not to the same degree. I mean, it's rising over here. Where we are different is we don't allow advertising for drugs on television. Whereas when you're in America, every 10 minutes on the TV, you're saying, ask your doctor for this. If you've got this pain, if you've got that, if you're slightly depressed. And the American public are being pummeled every single day with advertising from the drug companies. Mm-hmm. In the UK, we do have a problem, but it is nowhere near the level of usage of antidepressants mm-hmm. and psychiatric drugging mm-hmm. is nowhere near. And of course, the main group of people that are suffering in America are the military, and the military have been used. I mean, this is, in fact, the reason behind the vast increase of suicides in the military, mm-hmm. because our military in the United States, I say I feel, the military in the United States have been exposed to huge volumes of these psychiatric drugs. And in fact, there's a very, very good film which was produced by the Citizens Commission of Human Rights, which you can find on their website, cchr.org, which is called The Enemy Within, and it goes into why it is that these suicides are occurring in the military. So the human cost to America of what these psychiatric drugs are doing is just extraordinary. And I just think it's about time that we look past the, public relations department of these drug companies, and we start to realize that the lives of these young people in America that are being taken are far, far more important than protecting the profits of the drug companies. I think this year, I think the sales of antidepressants is something in the order of 13 billion this year. Excuse me.
Well, John, I like your idea.
It's a huge scandal.
I like your idea of a congressional inquiry in linking these. We're with John Mappin live in the UK. He's live right now at Camelot Castle Hotel, and he's the owner of Camelot Castle Hotel. This is where King Arthur was born, and this is in the UK, just off the Atlantic Ocean. So, John, I like the idea, and it's something we ought to look at, just like we're looking at opioids. And it took congressional action and a lot of jawboning to get doctors to stop prescribing massive amounts of painkiller drugs and addicting a large segment of U.S. society on it because they were taking like candy.
You're so right.
I mean, it's the same thing. And when you go back to these mood drugs, John, and you really bring something up that's interesting. I think the first one was something, and correct me, callers, if I'm wrong, text me, but I think like 20 or 30 years ago, they came out with Zoloft. And
that's right.
Younger kids that had behavioral problems or something, and I forget, it was diagnosed as something, something was lacking in the brain, it wasn't being produced.
Yeah. The whole pitch is that you've got a chemical imbalance.
Chemical imbalance, right. And so
this is unprovable, you see.
Yeah, it's exactly unprovable. And so they started with Zoloft, and then it went from Zoloft to this one to that one, then Paxil, I remember, was big. And then all of a sudden, in 15 years, you turned around, and it seemed like 1 out of every 3 children in the U.S. were on it. And it was like, what the hell is going on here? And now that's persisted. And I guess, whenever a kid was diagnosed with something that the parents thought was an issue, they immediately turned to some kind of a Zoloft or some mood-altering drug to create the chemical balance. And now it's gotten to epidemic proportions.
You're absolutely right.
Right. So I like your idea. I mean, I think there has to be a link. Our bigger problem in the U.S., John, in the short term is we've got an election coming up in 2020. And the problem that Republicans and the president's got right now is suburban women that the president absolutely needs to get reelected are going to be looking at this. And one day they're just going to say, I've just had enough. I mean, I fear for my family. I'm going to have to do something, and do something is voting out Trump. So he's got to do something.
I think we may be at that point now.
Yes. We have to do something.
Which is why now is the time
to
expose, if you like, this hidden third party that has been present in American society
Big
all
Pharma.
along.
So you're basically, your position
is...
is...
anybody listening
your position...
a website, cchr.org, which is the Citizens Commission of Human Rights. And they've done all the research on this. And it's really, really black and white. But I agree with you. The president needs to be seen to be doing something.
Yeah.
And needs to do something effective.
Yeah.
And, whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
However... restricting gun ownership is not going to stop these shooters, because these shooters are caused by the psychiatric drugs. You see, this is the big lie that America has been living with now for over 20 years. We've been seeing the rise of these shooters and suicide rates going up and so on and so forth. The cause of this is the psychiatric drugs. And if you do the analysis and if you look at the figures, it is absolutely black and white. I mean, all you have to do is look up the numbers of these shooters that have been on these psychiatric drugs. So I agree with you that the president needs to do something or be seen to be doing something, but in reality, that is a cosmetic thing, and it won't actually get to the root of the problem. And I'm sure you're the same as me. I like to get to the root of the problem. And what is it? I think what America has to say is, what is it that is causing these shooters to do these horribly, horribly evil acts? And the psychiatric lobby in America and the people that have been pushing these drugs on the American population for decades and decades now, these are the people that are creating the killers. And I think it's time to hold them to account. And I think if the president was to, by the way, you want to talk about draining the swamp, that move would do more to drain the swamp in D.C. because the number of people that are profiting from the sales of these drugs and the lobbyists that are campaigning on behalf of Big Pharma, I mean, this is mythological in proportion. That makes the King Arthur myth seem like a small little story. There are people who are making millions and millions from the creation of these killers. Mm-hmm. And that's what's going on. And I think if you peel back the surface, and I think, for the first time, you've got somebody in the White House that really cares about the American people, mm-hmm. that really loves the American people, mm-hmm. and also has the balls to take on Big Pharma. Mm-hmm. Because, these guys are not going to go down lightly. This is a huge, huge profit center for them. But I agree with you, something needs to be done.
I've got a question here from a caller, Corey in Williamsburg, Virginia. Says, would you ask your guest, would you agree that some people with serious mental illness depend on a medication that works?
Well, I think they've become dependent on it. And the fact of the matter is that, these drugs are highly, highly addictive. Mm-hmm. But there are other solutions to depression. Mm-hmm. Now, these drugs don't cure depression. Now, what I would agree with is where you have very, very extreme situations, and I'm talking about probably 1 in 10,000 cases of where drugs are currently prescribed.
Right.
Then some medication can be used to calm a person down or to sedate them if they are what I would call violent psychotics.
Now, we're with John
Mappin. On the whole, there are other methods that work better.
We're with John Mappin. He's the owner of Camelot Castle Hotel, and one of the most beautiful hotels in the world, certainly in the United Kingdom. If you're there, that's one thing you want to visit, Camelot Castle Hotel, turning that beautiful castle into a hotel offering peace and tranquility. He also owns a string of local newspapers in the UK. And, John, you also should own a radio show there, so you can be able to go on and spread the word like I do every day.
You're very kind. We were actually talking about launching Camelot Castle Radio, so we'll have to get you on there to give the views of America. But
I can certainly help you with that. John, I've only got a couple minutes. I want to get to Boris Johnson, Brexit. Your new prime minister, he's hanging by a thread. He's got a 1-vote majority. You lost that special election. People said it was because of Brexit, but from afar, I think there was a scandal going on with the current PM. So guy's hanging by a thread, but he says he's getting out. And if they can't make a deal, he's like, the hell with them. What's going to happen?
Well, I tell you what's got to happen. Your good president has got to summon Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage to Washington, bang their heads together, and tell them that they've got to work together. Otherwise, we're going to end up with a socialist government in the UK, and Europe will go completely socialist. Unless Boris Johnson works with Nigel Farage and secures Brexit for the British people and secures the sovereignty for the British people, then the freedom of the UK is going to go down, and basically we will end up with what will be a borderline communist government over here. It's a very, very serious situation.
Why did you lose?
The president, it's down to the president of the United States. Again, I'm afraid, he's having to solve a lot of problems around the world. He's a wonderful, wonderful president, but he needs to help out the UK. He needs to literally talk some sense into both of those leaders, because they both sort of have people in their ear telling them that they can do it on their own, you see, and that's always a very dangerous combination. They've got to come together. Nigel Farage is a fantastic person, and Boris is a fantastic person, but they just don't have the support in the country to, what happens is both of them being active in politics, it splits the vote, you see. So with them splitting the vote of their supporters, mechanically they won't have the number to secure a majority. So that's why they have to work together.
Why'd you lose that? Why'd you lose that special PM seat in a Conservative stronghold to the Liberal candidate. Is that a harbinger
that's
of things to come?
Why is because the vote was split. Nigel Farage took 10% of the votes, and I think the Conservatives took 30-something of the votes, and then the Liberal Democrats came in and beat them. But if all of Nigel's votes had gone to the Conservatives, then the Conservatives wouldn't have lost the seat. You see, there are two factions in England fighting for Brexit. They both want Brexit, but they're splitting the vote. You see, that's the problem. So they have to work together, but they're not working together.
So the Liberal...
Like if you have two politicians that both believe in the same thing, but they're fighting each other and they split the vote.
Right.
So by the mechanics of democracy, you lose.
So
and the Liberal Democrats, the majority of people in England want Brexit, but their votes are being split by these two players, you see.
Got it.
And it's actually very, very selfish of both of them.
So that's why they got to
work
get together. Right. So what you're saying is the Liberal candidate that flipped that seat to Jeremy Corbyn and the Libs, she got under 50%, is what you're saying.
Oh, she got under 50%, absolutely.
Yeah, and so if you added up the Conservative vote and the Farage party vote, whatever he calls his party now, if they combine together, they would have.
Party. He calls his party the Brexit Party.
They would have. The Conservative and the Brexit Party would have held the seat had they combined.
Absolutely,
that's your
held
problem.
The seat.
Okay,
they would have had the majority of numbers if they'd all worked together.
All right, I got to roll. John Mappin, thank you. I love the idea of Castle Radio, the Camelot Castle Radio.
Absolutely, you
I
can
love
have a
it.
voice in Europe. How about that?
I know it. I'd love to be a part of that idea.